Hi, I'm Peter Chan, National Weather Service Program Lead of the Alaska Weather Show, and I have a very important change notice to share with you. The last TV broadcast of the Alaska Weather Show in the traditional sense over the airwaves will be on Saturday, June 30th. Starting on July 1st and thereafter, the National Weather Service will provide a modified web-based version of the program on a new YouTube channel. So that means you'll be able to find us. We'll be moving from at AKwx TV to at NWS Alaska, and you can go ahead and subscribe to that channel now. There will be a public comment period from May 15th through July 30th, so please send your comments or concerns to nws.service-change-comments@noaa.gov. And if you have any other questions, you may reach carrie.haisley at noaa.gov and donald.moore@noaa.gov. Thank you for your patience and understanding.
Hello, and thanks for joining us for this Friday's edition of Alaska Weather. Up first, satellite imagery showing a lot of clouds here. Big area of low pressure up over the Chukchi Sea there. Really sending surges of moisture around that center through the interior, one here over the east side, another one coming in from the west and northwest, trailing on down into Norton Sound, across St. Lawrence Island, and then a little bit of a breakthrough here between the northern system and this front coming across the eastern Aleutians from the southern Bering Sea, bringing rain on Alaska Island into the Alaska Peninsula today, back up across the Pribilofs, cloudy, rainy day there. And then that kind of wraps back around into Adak with drier conditions out towards Shimya and also over the central Aleutians. Southeast coast, not too bad. A few areas of clouds here with some moisture kind of circulating up. Low pressure well southwest of the Queen Charlotte Islands. Got one surge here kind of backing out to the west now. Another one coming up. So rain, again, the heaviest amounts over the southern southeast coast. Much lighter amounts, more scattered showers up to the north. And rolling this again. And see the heavier precipitation through here. It really isn't all that heavy, but areas of rain and snow with this system coming in. And for tonight, that'll continue. Actually, over the weekend, it'll be slowly tracking eastward. Mostly tomorrow, then should be an improvement once that kicks on out and some high pressure starts to take over a little bit. And on the chart today, you can see the trough here coming up into the panhandle, keeping it cloudy and unsettled there. Some showers all the way up to the north. Areas of showers, rain, and snow depending on the elevation here, south central Alaska, especially the Alaska Range, mountainous areas of the Copper River Basin, and up into the upper Tanana Valley 40-mile country. Pretty good sunshine here along the southwest coast. And down across the Alaska Peninsula to Kodiak Island, and then the rain with this system coming in to the Alaska Peninsula, back up toward the Pribilofs, and rain and snow showers along the North Gulf, or along the Arctic coast, north slope into the Brooks Range. For tonight, this low drops down to the central Aleutians there. Front weekends continues to push rain in across the Alaska Peninsula, and rain will spread in late tonight along the southwest coast. Pretty light rainfall amounts that reach the coastline. Heaviest will be back here to the west and southwest, and even that won't be all that heavy. And areas of snow up here to the north, light snow back around Kotzebue, Seward Peninsula, all the way up to the Arctic coast. Become a mixture of moisture here as you get into the central interior, and then ending over toward the upper Tanana Valley, 40-mile country, high pressure drying it out for the eastern Arctic or the eastern North Gulf coast, with some showers continuing over the mountainous terrain south central Alaska, and stays kind of wet over the southern panhandle. Showers starting to taper off up to the north. And for tomorrow, still looks kind of cloudy and showery for the southeast coast there with a weak trough in the area. Area of rain here over the western part of the state for the first day of the weekend. Showers over the western Alaska Range. Maybe some afternoon showers developing over the Kenai Peninsula over the mountains. But not too bad here. Eastern interior. Some pretty good sunshine from actually the North Gulf Coast, eastern North Gulf Coast, right up into Copper River Basin and into the eastern interior there. Stays wet with the Alaska Peninsula with this frontal boundary right there, and that starts to increase the chances of rain southwest and western Kodiak Island tomorrow. Kind of a damp day for Bristol Bay with cloudy skies. A little bit of a breakout here to the west, in the central Aleutians. Next system brings gale force winds with it into the western and then central Aleutians. That front drives eastwards, bringing rain as far east as Atka late in the afternoon on Sunday. Dry conditions farther to the east, but southeast flow here, keeping a chance of moisture along the coastal areas, the south coast of the Alaska Peninsula. Some of that could work all the way up into Kodiak Island along the southwest coast. A little bit not so much in the way of showers, but still kind of cloudy and cool out here. Warmer and more sunshine. South central Alaska, Kuskokwim Valley up into the eastern northeast interior, as well as the Copper River Basin. Temperatures starting to break the 70-degree mark over toward Eagle, maybe Northway, and drying out over the Panhandle. Best chance of showers will stay down to the south and southeast. And for lows tonight, in the 20s, Brooks Range up to the Arctic coast and out to the northern Bering Sea. Otherwise, 30s and 40s everywhere else. Highs for tomorrow. 60 to 65 here, eastern interior, around 60 near Fairbanks, and then cooling into the mid to upper 30s out toward the Seward Peninsula and St. Lawrence Island. 40s for the Pribilofs, 50s south central Alaska, actually all of southern Alaska here, maybe in the lower 60s, Copper River Basin, and mostly in the 50s for the Panhandle, followed by lows in the 40s for the southeast coast on Sunday morning, upper 30s and 40s southern Alaska, and now 40s all the way up into the interior, still into the below freezing there, St. Lawrence Island, Seward Peninsula, North Slope and Arctic coast, but the east side warming up a little bit. And then highs on Sunday, lower 70s now for the east side there, or maybe 68 to 73, and not quite making 70 for Fairbanks. Some areas may. Mid-60s, so sit in the valley, and but 50s for the Kenai Peninsula, trying to push 70.
Hi, I'm Josh Walston, a meteorologist with the Alaska Pacific River Forecast Center. I'm here today to provide you an update to the 2023 Alaska Breakup. Breakup has concluded on all major rivers, creeks, and streams throughout Alaska. However, there is still a concern for snowmelt flooding throughout the state, so be flood ready. To be flood ready, ask yourself these 3 questions. Are you located in the floodplain? What is the fastest way to higher ground? And what roads nearby are most likely to flood? It's also a good idea to have an emergency preparedness kit. Within that kit, it's good to have medications that you or your family may need, survival gear, as well as non-perishable food items. It's also a good idea to communicate any of these plans with your family or friends. Taking a look at the current state of conditions for our Alaska rivers, we can see that breakup has completed and our rivers south of the Brooks Range are open and ice-free. North of the Brooks Range, we still are seeing some ice conditions. However, satellite and observations are limited at this time. Conditions are changing rapidly, so please keep up to date with all of our watches, warnings, and advisories, as well as any of our information for the rivers north of the Brooks Range at weather.gov/APRFC. Taking a look at breakup dates on the Kuskokwim River, as expected, breakup was dynamic this year, and it was 9 to 11 days later compared to historical averages. Taking a look at current conditions on the Kuskokwim River, we can see here that while we still have high waters, the stage is decreasing with a decreasing trend at most locations from upriver to downriver. Looking at McGrath, we could see that nice downward trend, as well as Crooked Creek, a nice downward trend in the stage, and we're forecasting these 2 locations to continue that downward trend through the weekend. Looking at Bethel, moving downstream, we can still see that we have some high water in place in the Bethel region. However, we are seeing that downward trend. Note the crests are due to any tidal influences in that area, but it's important to note that there's still a downward trend in the stage. Moving to the Yukon River, we can see here, once again, we were expecting a dynamic breakup, and we were expecting breakup to be later than average, which it was, about 4 to 8 days later compared to historical average. However, there is still concern for some high water due to what was an ice jam in place that is now flushed out on the lower Yukon. So any backwater that was in place associated with that ice jam is starting to recede on the lower Yukon from Anvik all the way down to Aluknuk. However, we are still seeing some high water as well as some out-of-bank flow seen here on the satellite imagery in the red pixels from about Anvik all the way down to Pilot Station. This is primarily due to those ice jams that were in place, as well as the combination of snowmelt runoff that has enhanced or increased the stage in these locations, and as well as throughout the Yukon River. Also, a thing to note is the Inoko River in the Shagaluk area, which is just east of the Anvik area. We can still see those red pixels there, which is indicating that there is still some out-of-bank and overland flow in that area. So please stay vigilant as we still have some high water concerns in those areas. Taking a look at our hydrograph, as mentioned, we still have high water, upriver near Stevens Village, but we are seeing a downward trend, and we're expecting that downward trend to continue through the weekend. In Galena, we still have some water, high water in place, but we're also still seeing that downward trend. However, it is just very slow at this time. Moving downriver from there, taking a look at Pilot Station, we are still seeing a downward trend as well. But please note that there is still some high water concerns as well as some out-of-bank flow in the lower Yukon from the previous ice jams as well as the snowmelt runoff. That leads us to any flood advisories. We're looking primarily for those locations where we are still seeing that receding water from those previous ice jams, but we have flood advisories still in place from about Anvik to Aluknuk. This is primarily from those ice jams. However, there's the high water that is still to yet make its way down from the snowmelt runoff that we're seeing upriver on the Yukon. So for any updates on our watches, advisories, and warnings, please visit weather.gov/APRFC/flood. Moving on to snowpack and how much snowpack remains and how much of a concern do we have for snowmelt flooding. Taking a look at a snapshot from a week ago as of May 25th on the left and June 2nd on the right, we can see we still have a significant snow coverage in some places and not a lot has changed over the last week. However, one takeaway is that most of the low elevation as well as the lower elevation locations in the interior as well as the southwest have depleted or have significant snow loss. We still have some significant high elevation snowpack in south central as well as the Brooks Range and the North Slope area. So we still have some concern for some snowmelt runoff and or minor flooding due to the enhanced snowmelt runoff here in the coming weeks. It's good to note as well that snowmelt runoff usually crests in the mid-June timeframe, and as we are just starting off June, we still have several more weeks to go before we see a significant depletion of this snow coverage. So once again, be mindful of how much snow is there that there is still to lose, and how much water will rise due to the increase of snowmelt runoff. Taking a look at our temperatures, we can see here that we have above average temperature projections for the northern half of the state as well as southeast Alaska, and we have below average chances for cooler temperatures for the southern half of the state. Focusing on the warmer temperatures in the northern half where all of that snow is still in place, this will enhance the melt rate as well as enhance the runoff that goes into our rivers. Is primarily the Yukon as well. So we'll continue to see high waters for the next several weeks due to that warmer temperatures as well as enhanced snowmelt. Looking at our 48-hour flood potential, we can see here we are still expecting high water or significant rises on area rivers in the interior, primarily on the upper Yukon through the mid Yukon, as well as the lower Yukon, and the Porcupine River as well. We do have some minor river flooding potential for the lower Yukon, as we discussed earlier, for Anvik, all the way down to Aluknuk, where we're still seeing that high water from those ice jams that were in place that have now flushed out, as well as the enhancement of snowmelt that is yet to make it downriver. There's also our Chena and Tanana basins, where we have been seeing some recent heavy rainfall in the area and has led to significant rises on area streams. Once again, that's the Chena and the Tanana basins. Taking a quicker look, deeper look at those two locations, we can see here that the Chena River, just below the Moose Creek Dam, saw some significant rises just below minor stage, as since crested, and we're expecting that that stage to go down throughout the weekend. Looking at the Salcha River for the Tanana Basin there, we can see that the heavy precipitation increased the stage on the Salcha just into action stage, but we saw a crest there late yesterday, and we're starting to see that trend, downward trend, going into the weekend. However, with some snowmelt as well as some potential for precipitation through the weekend, we are expecting maybe another little rise throughout the weekend on the Salcha River. So keep that in mind, and for the most up-to-date information, please visit weather.gov/APRC/flood. And as always, we'd like to say thank you so much for watching and sending all of your observations. All observations are welcome, and you can send your observations to our email at nws.ar.aprfc@noaa.gov, or you can give us a call at 907-266-5160.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
All the low flying conditions out here over the Bering Sea and along the Alaska Peninsula, northward there through the Bering Strait, and then along the southern slopes of the Western Brooks Range, northwest coast, up to maybe Point Lay. Otherwise, IFR off the eastern Arctic coast. Pretty good VFR in the interior, still some leftover moisture producing marginal VFR south central Alaska to the Alaska Range. Panhandle, not too bad, mostly VFR there, North Gulf Coast and Kodiak Island. And for the afternoon tomorrow, VFR for the Panhandle, North Gulf Coast, Eastern Interior, Central Interior, not too bad. Marginal VFR there along and south of the Brooks Range there, Northern Koyukuk Valley, Kobuk Valley, on out to the northwest coast. And still a pretty good area of IFR over the northern Bering Sea here that extends southwestward. And then southward across the western Aleutian, some more IFR on the south coast of Unalaska Island, the Alaska Peninsula up to about Sitkinak, and maybe Akiak there. Otherwise, possible IFR up to south coast of the Kenai Peninsula, marginal VFR, western Alaska Range. And then for the Sunday morning time frame, more expansive area of IFR here, Gulf of Alaska into the Kenai Peninsula, across the Barren Islands into Kamishak Bay, IFR for Kodiak Island, Alaska Peninsula, most of the Aleutians again, the more solid area farther to the west, and that extends northeastward. Up to, but not quite reaching the southwest coast and the northwest coast, some IFR there, and IFR mostly off the coast of the Arctic up here with some marginal VFR, but VFR for the North Slope, Eastern Central Interior, Copper River Basin, and then moving to Sunday afternoon. Pretty good for the Panhandle over the inside waters, a little bit lower out along the coast. And North Gulf Coast, maybe some marginal VFR. IFR still holding near or just off the coast of the Kenai Peninsula, but covering the east side of Kodiak Island. A little bit of marginal VFR, again, western Alaska Range. Interior, though, looking pretty good. VFR right up to the Arctic coast. And then still lower conditions out along the Yukon Delta, St. Lawrence Island, southward and southwestward. Looking pretty down in the IFR zone. Passes Anatuvik. Marginal VFR, same forecast for Adigan, marginal at times. Lake Clark and Merrill, marginal VFR with rainy, marginal to start, improving possibly to VFR, or kind of bouncing back and forth throughout the day between marginal and VFR conditions. That same forecast good for rainy, kind of marginal there. And Isabel, though, looks VFR at this point in time, as does Mintasta and Tanita VFR. A little lower conditions plaguing Portage there in the early part of the day, but becoming VFR by afternoon or before. Late morning maybe. Chilcoot and White, VFR. Freezing levels, still cold up here to the northwest and north, 2,000 feet or less there, with that cold upper low kind of hanging out here over the Chukchi Sea, and another system keeping it chilly out over the eastern Aleutians there. And for icing, south to north flow here carrying a zone of moisture with it. Could be some areas of isolated moderate rime icing from the Arctic coast, right on down through the western interior, Kodiak Island, and another zone here over the Panhandle. And then back to the west. Next zone, staying west of the western Aleutians there, so I didn't even bother drawing it on. And from there, taking a look at the jet stream, there's that upper low there just off the western Arctic coast. Flow around that, southwest 100 knots here across the Kobuk-Koyukuk Valley areas. Lighter, more southerly flow here over the western interior to the southwest, and the strongest winds here east of the Panhandle. 9,000 feet show southeast 40 over the southern southeast coast, 50 to 55 knot southwest winds there across the Brooks Range, and at 3,000 feet, south to north flow here, again over the western interior up to the Arctic coast, ranging anywhere from 25 to 35 knots. Strongest here from the southern Kuskokwim Valley down to Kodiak Island, but light variable wind conditions there for the Panhandle. Not too bad out over the Aleutians. Bering Sea looking at light winds as well. So from there, looking at turbulence, pretty smooth out here to the west. Nothing significant in the forecast there turbulence-wise. Same thing for the Panhandle, eastern interior. Areas of isolated moderate turbulence over the western interior here, Bristol Bay, diminishing as you head north.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Coastal water forecast for the south coast of the Panhandle there. Southeast winds on Saturday at 10 to 20 knots. Northeast winds 10 knots on the central coast. Variable winds 10 knots for the north coast. Seas 3 feet. Lynn Canal, Glacier Bay, south winds at 10 knots. North or southeast winds 10 knots for Stevens Passage. And southeast winds 15 knots for Clarence Strait. On Sunday, south winds 15 knots, Lynn Canal, Stevens Passage, and Clarence Strait, with seas at about 3 feet. And out along the coast, west winds 15 knots with 4 to 5 foot seas. For Prince William Sound, tomorrow, variable winds at 10 knots. Variable winds 10 knots for the North Gulf Coast. Small craft advisories for the Barren Islands, southeast winds 25 knots, southeast at 30 knots for, Kamishak Bay. South to southwest winds 15 knots for Cook Inlet. And for Sunday, winds turn around to the northeast for Cook Inlet, but only about 10 to 15 knots with 2 to 3 foot seas. East winds 30 knots, though, for Kamishak Bay and the Barren Islands with seas just under 10 feet. And for the eastern North Gulf Coast, variable winds at 10 knots. Prince William Sound, variable winds at 10 knots, seas at about 2 feet. Western North Gulf Coast, east at 20. Kodiak Island, Saturday, east to southeast winds, 15 to 20 knots. The Alaska Peninsula, south to southeast winds, 15 to 20 knots, with 2 to 5 foot seas. Bristol Bay, southeast at 25, seas 3 feet. Excuse me. And for Sunday, Alaska Peninsula, southeast winds 15 to 20 knots. Kodiak Island, east-southeast winds 20 to 25 knots, and southeast 25 for Bristol Bay. Eastern Aleutians, east to southeast winds 15 to 20 knots for the day Saturday. And the central Aleutians, west-northwest at 20. And the far western Aleutians, pretty light winds at about 15 knots. Sunday, big change out there. Gale warnings coming into the western and central Aleutians, up to 30 to 35 knots here as far east as Atka Island, and also an increase in the winds for the Fox Islands, east 25 to 30 knots. Excuse me. There. For the southwest coast tomorrow, southeast at 20. Southeast 20 knots for the Yukon Delta coast there, and St. Lawrence Island. South at 15 for Norton Sound. Light variable winds for the Pribilofs, and northeast at 15 for St. Matthew Island. For the southwest coast on Sunday, east winds 15 to 20 knots, northeast at 20 for the Pribilofs, and east winds at 20 knots for St. Matthew Island. Norton Sound winds east at 15 knots, same thing for St. Lawrence Island. Up along the Arctic coast, east side here, east-southeast winds at 15 to 20 knots, central coast. Southeast winds at 20 knots, and for the western coast, south at 20, Wales to Cape Lisburne, south winds 15 knots. And for Sunday here for the Chukchi Sea, northeast at 15, western Arctic coast, southwest 15 knots. Same thing for the central coast, southwest at 15 knots. And south to northwest winds for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast at 10 to 20 knots. For tonight, showers, heaviest down over the southern panhandle, associated with that trough there. Higher pressure dries it out for the eastern North Gulf Coast. Still some showers over the mountainous terrain of south central Alaska into Prince William Sound. Areas of snow, this front moving eastward, trailing back across the Yukon Delta. Rain spreading eastward there, so look for clouds increase this evening, thickening, lowering, becoming rain along the southwest coast, showers back to the west. And for Saturday, rain over the panhandle, rain over the western interior areas, and dry out to the west. Sunday, a little bit drier, all areas, a little more sun with some clearing.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.